brains of lab animals, and the third generation of pups in the lab were born sexually dysfunctional and morbidly obese. And so it changed the DNA in the lab. One of the things we were talking about, Larly, before the break was the alcohol. And people say, well, how does that affect people so differently? Think about it. There are people who can drink half a glass of wine and be tipsy. And there are other people who can drink a fifth of whiskey and not even appear inebriated.
Right.
So there are also happy drunks, if you want to say, categorize it, and there are mean drunks. So alcohol affects people in different ways.
Good point.
And so do cigarettes. This is parallel to the tobacco industry issue. They, for years, when they could get away with it, produced all this scientific evidence that cigarettes and nicotine and the things in cigarette products do not cause cancer or heart attack or stroke. And now, they've been busted, and everybody knows that they do. But in the 50s, they were advertising in medical journals. In the Journal of American Medical Association, there's an ad from the 50s that said more doctors smoke Camels than any other brand. So
just because somebody says it so and produces some shoddy science to support it doesn't mean the American public is being snowed over. We all know better.
That's right.
So, I call it the pretend reality. We all go along, and then we pretend this is okay over here. What do you think about the fast food suits? I mean, there has to be some discretion that we employ ourselves when we know better.
Well, what I end every lecture with is eat real food. Is fast food real food, or has it been adulterated and fried to high temperature? We don't need to be eating foods like that. We need to eat fresh foods, organic foods, real foods.
Just because they make it doesn't mean we have to go to the trough and eat it.
That's right.
Now they're busting the hydrogenated oils. I love this. Talk about another good food that you just go out and adulterate and change and make it so mysterious the body can't recognize it or process it.
That's right. And it's the same with artificial sweeteners. Anything artificial is not going to work as well in our bodies. Haven't we learned that with artificial organ transplant?
Oh,
you can transplant an artificial heart into somebody, and they can live months and maybe a few years with that in place, but they have to take enormous amounts of drugs to counteract the body's immune system rejection effect. And artificial sweeteners are no different. But people never think about that in those terms. They just think artificial is great and better than nature. Well,
the old better living through chemistry, right? That's been sold to us for so long.
There are some scientists who've never met a chemical they didn't like.
Oh, good line. I like that. Tell me about the obesity, in the aspartic acid. We'll get back to methanol, and I have more questions about the phenylalanine. But aspartic acid sounds so innocent.
Yes,
and where else is it found? I've seen that a lot around.
Aspartic acid. Now, remember, aspartic acid is found in nature. And when it's found in, there's nothing wrong with aspartic acid or phenylalanine, except if you are phenylketonuria, PKU. You've got to limit your phenylalanine. But phenylalanine in nature is combined with all the other amino acids. It's a branch chain of amino acids that are bound together in nature. Well, when you start breaking those bonds and you start producing something in a laboratory and isolating it.
And then putting it in huge dosages.
That's right. And, for example, the methanol in aspartame, in that molecule, the methanol breakdown product, is dangerous because ethanol is not present in the molecule. Now, in nature, ethanol is the antidote to methanol. And so, sure, there are both kinds of alcohol in an orange, for example. But that's the key. There are both kinds there, so they balance each other out. There's a fine balance in nature that man cannot produce. Man cannot make an apple. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be better than nature in the laboratory, and it just isn't happening.
So aspartic acid that causes these holes in the brains of lab animals, and it's also this neuroexcitatory. I know that Russell Blaylock has told us a lot about the excitotoxins in not just artificial sweeteners, but also in MSG, which is another glutamates are found naturally in nature, but when you concentrate them, that's when they can cause the problems in the brain and excite a brain cell to death.
That's right, and he is wonderful.
Isn't he wonderful?
He is an amazing person and dear friend, and he is right on target with his advice.
They're looking at brain tissue, and you can see the effects of this.
Right. He's a neurosurgeon. I mean, somebody like that has put his whole reputation on the line to be out there talking about this, because essentially, for any scientist, which is what he is, it's professional suicide to talk about this. You get laughed out of your profession and your conferences, and if you do a study on aspartame and show that it causes harm in the laboratory, there will be a ton of studies done the very next year and presented at all these conferences and scientific symposiums showing how wrong you are.
But, Mary, you were just saying that you were able to go. I mean, you're not a scientist. You're a concerned mother who spent many, many hours on your doctor's path to the medical library. You found that these were the components. You found that these studies showed that these detrimental effects happen in the laboratory animals. You showed that you were able to find all this. How could reputable scientists refute this story when it's the logic is staring them in the face, and they could put two and two together quite easily? You did it.
It's because
Why can't they?
Well, I came into it without any prior knowledge and prior biases about it.
Without a party line to tell, right?
Exactly. I had no axe to grind. I had no vendetta at all against anybody. All I wanted was the truth about my daughter's illness, and I was there to save my child's life. And so when I found out all these things, and I was asked to testify at the Senate hearing in Washington in 1987, a year, almost to the date, after my daughter had suffered her grand mal seizure, then I met a pilot who said, "Mary, why are you doing this?" Just like you said a while ago, why do I do this? The last 17 years of my life and thousands of dollars, which as a widow I don't have.
Oh, I asked you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, my husband died from a brain tumor in 1985.
Do you feel it was related to this stuff?
No, he had it prior to his brain hemorrhage.
Oh,
I think he has a predisposition to it, but it may have hastened the massive brain hemorrhage because the doctor had him on a diet to regulate his blood pressure and cholesterol and triglycerides. So at his parents' home, I insisted that he have equal in his morning coffee. And at the end of that week, he did collapse with a massive brain hemorrhage. That 6 months later, he was dead of brain cancer. No, aspartame didn't kill him, but I think it might have hastened the process.
Just helped trigger the whole thing. By the way, I'm sorry about both your husband, and I hope your daughter's okay now.
Well, she seems to be okay, but of course it's still out there in, it's not in hidden form because by law aspartame has to be labeled. But do people read labels and read the fine print? Usually not. And so she's susceptible to getting it again.
Oh, because in a disguised form.
Yeah, yeah. And neotame, oddly enough, which was approved about this time last year in the U.S.
Yes, tell us about neotame. I haven't heard of that one yet.
Neotame is the aspartame formula with one addition. It's 13,000 times sweeter than aspartame because of the addition of an alcohol called 3-dimethylbutyl. And 3-dimethylbutyl, as I looked it up 5 years ago when I first heard that neotame was about to be submitted for approval, I found that it was on the EPA's list of most hazardous chemicals.
Oh, my gosh.
And so this addition to aspartame has allowed them to have a new patent, first of all.
Right, this is the patent rescue formula.
That's exactly right. You got it. And not only that, but they somehow weaseled their way into the FDA not requiring labeling of this neotame.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
And it's far more deadly, potentially, than aspartame, even though they don't have to use as much because it's so many times sweeter, you know.
What happened to the good art of whistleblowing in this country? I thought whistleblowers eventually succeeded because they had the weight of evidence on themselves.
Well,
and yet all this whistleblowing is going on, and the laws aren't changing, and there's no recall, there's no ban on this. Didn't they do this with saccharides, a while ago? Finally, the evidence just weighed in, and they couldn't deny it.
Well,
and yet they're going to attach another deadly chemical, known toxin, onto this molecule and send it out once again. I mean, this is just insane.
That's right. And the people the good, honest people who were trying to bring suit against the people who were manufacturing this, or the FDA and all of the different entities that are associated with this, have just given up. They've been bought off.
Oh,
they have been intimidated out of their eager pursuit of this as a process.
At the issue that it's very ironic that artificial sweetener is touted as a diet aid, right?
Right.
Don't use sugar, use artificial sweetener. And yet, it's very striking that the second generation pups or third generation were morbidly obese. Mm-hmm. So something is being changed here in the box. Mm-hmm. And look at the fattening of America. You go, why in the world are Americans getting so fat now to these alarming degrees? Could it be that 20 years of use, widespread use of something that unhitches your satiety center? I noticed that in the research.
Right.
That encourages obesity in some way they don't even understand, and that explain that research. It's really counterproductive to any kind of slimming routine here.
Well, it is. And here we get back to serotonin, the neurotransmitter again, which tells us that we've had enough. It brings us to satiety.
You feel full. You've had enough food. Your brain says, stop eating. We're full now.
That's right.
That's satiety.
And exactly. And so without serotonin to level your eating patterns out and make you know when you've had enough, instead it sets up a craving for the simple carbohydrates, the sweets, the sugars.